Hello folks, this is Sergey from Core Studio, and today I'll be showing you how to use the Swarm Rhino client. If you haven't seen our previous videos that show how to install Swarm on your desktop, then go ahead and check those out. This is a pretty straightforward process, and for this video I'll assume that you already have Swarm installed. I'm going to go ahead and click this login button, and now we are in the apps page, which is the front page of Swarm. As you can see, I don't currently have any apps installed, but I have this button that encourages me to go and get some apps. So let's do exactly that. The app opens the default browser, and now we're back in the apps marketplace. So here you can browse among many different parametric tools. I'm just going to click on this one to see what this app is about. We have a brief description, some platform compatibility information, and the buttons that let us install it in our client. But before installing this app, I'm going to go ahead and click on this red play button. That will take me to the Swarm web viewer. The web viewer allows you to run the app before actually installing it or before purchasing it once we start accepting the credit card from our users. Once again, currently we're in alpha, so all the apps are free. But we do consider a possibility that in the future, just like with any app store, Swarm authors and Swarm app developers might want to charge for some of their apps. So it's always good to be able to get a preview before actually committing to an app. So here on the left-hand side, we have a dashboard with a bunch of sliders and other inputs that we are free to play with. When I change some of the sliders on the left, that automatically triggers a compute that sends my inputs to the server and comes back with the output geometry. So I think we got a pretty good sense of what this app does. So I'm going to go back to this apps page and hit an install button. Let's go ahead and install a couple more things. So now that we've installed a bunch of apps, let's go back to the Rhino client. As you can see, none of them have shown up here. This is because we have to refresh our apps list by clicking on the Swarm logo here. And sure enough, we have the three of our apps appear in the list down below. Now let's take a minute to talk about the UI. So here on the apps page, we have the Swarm logo, which kind of serves like a home button that will always take you to this view. It also lets you refresh the apps page, which is what you just saw. Here on the right, we have the button that lets you log out of Swarm, and the version number, a button that lets you jump into the app editor if you want to create a new app. This is something that we'll be covering in a separate video. This button over here takes you to the online marketplace. Now that we don't have this Get More Apps button down here, you can just jump back to the marketplace by clicking on the globe. This is the icon of the platform that Swarm is currently running in. Again, Swarm is a cross-platform tool. We currently have desktop clients for Rhino, Grasshopper, CSI, Revit, Illustrator, and in some cases Swarm runs directly inside of the application, like in Rhino, or it is a free-floating window, so this icon just gives you a hint of what this particular Swarm instance is connected to. Once you get more apps and this list grows, the search bar will become significantly more useful. You'll also be able to sort your apps by name and by author. Different apps, depending on your permissions, will also allow you to either view them online, uninstall them, or edit them. In order to edit an app, you have to be an editor or an admin. You can check your permissions by looking at the lower left corner here. If you just install an app from the marketplace, you'll get the default view permissions, meaning you can run and use this app, but you won't be able to modify it in any way. If you have authored an app, or if someone have shared an app with you and made you an editor or an admin, then you'll be able to modify the underlying Grasshopper definitions, change the app name, control sharing, and do all the other things that admins do. Now let's take a look at one of the apps that we just installed. I'm going to go ahead and click on the apps card, and that will take us to the apps dashboard. This dashboard is very similar to what we've seen in the online web viewer. Essentially, it has a series of inputs, in this case, mostly sliders, and then a series of outputs that let you bake the resultant geometry. Now, you might be wondering, we just entered this app, we haven't really set any inputs, and we definitely didn't run a compute, so why are we seeing some preview geometry? Well, this is something that's called the default saved state. Essentially, it's a compute that's been run by the author and set as a default example that both lets users modify the geometry online and also gives you an idea of how to use the app once you first come to the dashboard. Saved states is a whole separate conversation, and we'll probably have a dedicated video to discuss them. But here, let's just change some values and hit run. And currently, we can see that Swarm is initializing the compute request, sending into the server, and we can see the progress bar at the bottom here. Now Swarm is rendering the output preview, and you can see that we received our results back. Very similar to Grasshopper, this geometry cannot be directly interacted with in Rhino. In order to be able to edit it, you have to bake it. And in order to do that, I'm going to scroll down to the output section, and I'm going to hit this bake button for each of the individual outputs. So now we are actually able to select and modify each individual surface that we just created. Swarm gives you some additional preview and baking options that are worth mentioning. Let's zoom out and clear our screen and then navigate to one of the drop-down menus on one of the output components. Here you can see that Swarm allows us to toggle whether we want to draw the wireframes or shade solids for each of the individual outputs. This becomes very useful when you have a complex model with a lot of outputs and you just want to pick and choose which particular layers of geometry you want to be looking at any particular moment. So let's turn our preview back on and take a look at the layers. So currently in the Layer tab in Rhino, I only have my default layer. So I'm going to create a couple more, and I'm going to change their colors just to make it easier to differentiate between them visually. Swarm will automatically pick up all the layers that we just created. So if I go to this output and look at the bake layer dropdown, I will actually see all the layers we just created. And I'm going to pick this red layer 1. As you can see, immediately Swarm adjusts to the new layer color. And this is also done very intentionally so that once you're assigning your outputs to different layers, you have immediate visual feedback that reminds you of where you're planning to bake your outputs. And now, if we bake everything again, you can see that we are baking into the layers that we specified in our extended drop-down menu. Now, let's clear our screen once again, and let's take a look at some of the other apps that we have previously installed. So, as you probably noticed, our first app let us play with sliders and some drop-downs, but didn't really accept any geometry as input. Let's take a look at Mesh Inflate. As you can see, we have our default saved state geometry popping up here again. And now we have a very similar dog bone shaped parameter like in the outputs, but in our input section. This plus here indicates that we can actually reference geometry into this app, and therefore we can feed our own geometric inputs and see what the results are. So let's do exactly that. Let's create a mesh plane, and let's just go with the default values, 10 by 10. We'll leave everything else the same. Here on the bottom, you can see that there's another geometric input named edges to lock. So let's add some curves and reference them in as well. I'm going to turn on the vertex snaps to make it a little easier for myself. And we'll do something like this. So in order to reference geometry to Swarm, I'm going to press this plus button. Rhino goes into selection mode, and I can reference this mesh plane. I can also select my geometry first, and then click on the plus button here. As you can see, it knows that this is a curve input versus this being a mesh input. So when I select everything including a mesh, it doesn't really matter. We only referenced 3 pieces of geometry, as this counter indicates, and this means that we only grabbed these 3 curves. So Swarm is intelligent enough to filter out the geometry that you are actually looking for. So we have our new input here. Let's go ahead and click the play button. And now you can see that we got back our results. Now, if you notice that you're getting tired of changing stuff around in the dashboard and then hitting the play button every time you want a new result, there's a more fluid option that we can offer you, which is called the live mode or the live sculpting. I'm going to go ahead and turn on this toggle. And so what live sculpting allows me to do is it will watch changes to my inputs. So I can scale this geometry, and you can see that immediately it triggered a compute. I can select some of the curves that we pre-selected, move it around, and immediately get a result. This is very useful if you're looking for a more flexible, responsive designing experience, kind of what you get with Grasshopper. Once you change some of your inputs and it recomputes the entire graph. So Swarm can do this as well. The last Swarm feature that I would like to mention today is the ability to bake out your inputs. I'm going to go back to the apps page, and I'm going to click on the Ripple app. I'll also clear our screen once again to keep things nice and tidy. So here we have our default geometry preview, the default state for this app. And you can see that the original curve input, the base curve, is highlighted as pink, and the output curves that we can hide by turning off the wireframe preview are highlighted in blue. This is the default convention employed by Swarm, very much the same way as Grasshopper uses green and red shades to signify its input geometry. So let's say that for some reason we want to recover this original curve. Of course, we can create a new curve and reference it in, but let's say that this original pink curve has some value to us. Maybe it came from a different model that has since been lost. Maybe it has something to do with photogrammetry that we did, and it matches perfectly to some element in the real world. So we want to be able to recover this curve. But as I mentioned before, this is just a preview, so we can't edit it directly. However, we can double-click on this drop-down on the input component this time. And aside from the preview options, which are exactly identical to the ones that we see on the output component, we also have this bake input geometry option. So now we've recovered this curve. We can scale it, change it in some subtle way that suits our needs, and now we can reference it back, and we can run the compute again. And once it comes back from the server, now this would be referencing our modified geometry. So this is how you use Swarm Rhino Client. Thank you very much for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.